Greetings. So glad you found your way to today's Unitarian Universalist Community of the Mountains Sunday service. I'm joining you through Zoom today as the COVID spike has sent me back into the sanctuary of my home. Wherever you are, I hope you too feel safe. This is an important service today, and we hope powerful. Thank you for being here with us. As usual, Beth will be hosting our chat line. If you encounter any technical issues, let her know and she'll do her best to solve it. So here we go. Please join me in singing our first song, I'm on My Way, 116, if you have a hymnal.
I'm on my way to the freedom land. I'm on my way to the freedom land. I'm on my way to the freedom land. I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way. I asked my siblings, come and go with me. I asked my siblings, come and go with me. I asked my siblings, come and go with me. I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way. If they say no, I'll go anyhow. If they say no, I'll go anyhow. If they say no, I'll go anyhow. I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way. I'm on my way, and I won't turn back. I'm on my way, and I won't turn back. I'm on my way, and I won't turn back. I'm on my way, great God, I'm on my way.
Good morning. My name is Allison Rivers Sampson, and I get to be your worship associate today. It's been a while since I've greeted you from this position. Some of you may know that I've returned to school for social work. As my availability has changed, I'm now supporting the Challenging White Privilege Task Force. Until about 8 years ago, I never would have thought of myself as having or perpetuating ideas consistent with white supremacy. That's when I first learned that by growing up in a culture based on those beliefs, it would be nearly impossible for me to not have some of them too. It would be like thinking I could swim in water without getting wet. Of course, that's possible with a wetsuit and a swim cap, but those things aren't automatically there. I must first know I need them, get them, and then use them every single time I'm in the water. Anti-racism work is like that, a practice I am committed to doing every single day for the rest of my life. Being a member of UUCM has stretched my learning in so many ways. I love that at our church, we talk openly about both politics and religion. I never would have thought that I'd appreciate that. I've come to recognize the profound truth that the personal is political and the political is personal. No matter where you are on that spectrum of awareness, welcome to the Unitarian Universalist community of the mountains. This is a place where we cultivate the opportunity to choose growth, celebrate love in all forms, honor identity expression, and champion all races and ethnicities. Thank you for being here today. I am so grateful we are together.
Nurture This Precious Light by Naomi King. How shall we begin to live out our free faith?
Nurture this precious light.
When we do, we are beacons of freedom, creating a safe place to rest, explore, and innovate.
Nourish this special light.
How we keep this lamp of truth and justice affects how and whether we are transforming inequity through witness and action.
Nurture this precious light.
As we nurture this precious light together, we become a light of hope, turning isolation into community, anguish into peace, sorrow into joy.
Nourish this special light.
As we do, our faith burns a steady flame of innovation, banishing illusion, creating a new and renewing way together.
Nurture this precious light.
With our living connections, with our glowing stories, with our flame of freedom moving hand to hand, we
Nourish this special light.
together we turn this world from bleak to bright, one flame, one fire, one light at a time.
And I invite you now to light your home chalice if you have one.
In our commitment to be in respectful and right relationship with the descendants of this area's indigenous people, we place a small basket of black oak acorns on our altar each week. In so doing, we remind ourselves and acknowledge that the Nisenan people are still here among us today, though nearly invisible, and that we are on Nisenan land that was never ceded, and that the original tribal families have yet to recover from the near genocide of their people. As residents or visitors in Nisenan land, let us support the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan tribe in efforts to stabilize their people, as well as their campaign to restore federal recognition.
In her book, Cast, Isabel Wilkerson says, America is an old house. We can never declare the work over. Wind, flood, drought, and human upheaval battle a structure that is already fighting whatever flaws were left unattended in the original foundation. When you live in an old house, you may not want to go into the basement after a storm to see what the rains have wrought. Choose not to look, however, at your own peril. The owner of an old house knows that whatever you are ignoring will never go away. Whatever is lurking will fester, whether you choose to look at it or not. Ignorance is no protection from the consequences of inaction. Whatever you are wishing away will gnaw at you until you gather the courage to face what you would rather not see. We in the developed world are like the homeowners who inherited a house on a piece of land that is beautiful on the outside, but whose soil is unstable loam and rock, heaving and contracting over generations, cracks patched, but deeper ruptures waved away for decades, centuries even. Many people may rightly say, I had nothing to do with how all this started. I have nothing to do with the sins of the past. My ancestors never attacked indigenous people, never owned slaves. And yes, none of us was here when this house was built. Our immediate ancestors may have had nothing to do with the stress cracks and bowed walls and fissures built into the foundation. We are the heirs to whatever is right and wrong with it. We did not erect the uneven pillars or joists, but they are ours to deal with now. And any further deterioration is in fact in our hands.
Desmond Gets Free. Desmond Gets Free by Matt Meyer, illustrated by Kim Pham, read by Tracy Pepper. For all those working to build a new world of justice, equity, and compassion. Desmond the mouse lived in the most beautiful meadow in all the land. Every morning, Desmond woke with the sunrise and would spend the day playing in the meadow. And every evening, Desmond would go to sleep in the middle of that meadow under the beautiful starry sky. One night, though, Desmond awoke when it was still dark out. He tried to roll over to a more comfortable spot, but something wasn't right. Desmond realized that his tail was stuck right to the ground and beginning to throb with pain. He felt behind him, and there was a huge boulder that seemed to have fallen in the middle of the meadow, just on his tail. Desmond pushed on the boulder and tugged on his tail. He pushed on the boulder and tugged on his tail. And he pushed and tugged and pushed and tugged. But it was no use. When he was out of breath and had just about given up, he saw a giraffe nearby in the grass. Good news, he thought. Oh, giraffe, Desmond cried. Could you please push the boulder a few inches in the other direction so that I could go free? The giraffe looked at Desmond and laughed the way giraffes do. Silly mouse, said the giraffe. That's no boulder. That's an elephant that's fallen asleep in the middle of the meadow just on your tail. Well, if you could just wake the elephant and ask him to roll over just a few inches in the other direction, I could go free. Well, replied the giraffe, you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie. I find it's best to not get involved in other animals' business. I find it's best to remain neutral in times like this. Desmond quietly replied, well, I do not appreciate your neutrality. The giraffe wandered off and Desmond tried calling out to the elephant to wake him up. But those giant ears were just too far away on the other side of that giant elephant body. So again, Desmond pushed on the elephant and tugged on his tail. He pushed and he tugged and he pushed and he tugged. But it was no use. When he was out of breath and had just about given up again, a gazelle wandered by. Oh, gazelle, he cried. Oh, gazelle, it seems that an elephant has fallen asleep just on my tail in the middle of this meadow. I'm stuck and it hurts. I wonder if you could gently wake him and ask him to roll over just a few inches in the other direction so I might go free. Well, said the gazelle, I see your problem there. But you know what they say about letting sleeping elephants lie. I find it's best not to get involved in other animals' business. I find it's best to remain neutral in times like these. Desmond replied almost to himself this time. I do not appreciate your neutrality. Desmond tried again to call out to the elephant. He tried again to push the giant animal away. He tried again and again to tug his little tail, but it was no use. When he was out of breath and had just given up for the last time, he saw another mouse wandering through the meadow. My name is Nelson. Nelson, this giant elephant has fallen asleep just on my tail in the middle of this meadow. I wonder if you might run over and call out into his giant ears and ask him to roll over just a few inches in the other direction so I could go free, Desmond asked. Of course, said Nelson. Nelson ran all the way to the other end of that giant elephant body and he called up to those giant elephant ears at the top of that giant elephant head. But the elephant didn't bulge. The elephant heard Nelson's small voice far away, but he felt too comfortable to move. Nelson ran back to Desmond, a little out of breath, and said, I have an idea. Don't move. He ran off. I won't, muttered Desmond. A little while later, though, Nelson emerged through the tall grass and he wasn't alone. Nelson had found 3 other mouse friends to help him, and each one of them had also brought another 3 friends. The whole group of them ran over to the giant head of that giant elephant. One mouse scrambled up onto the shoulders of another, and another mouse scrambled up on her shoulders. And then one after another, they climbed up until the whole group of them had formed a long mouse ladder right up the side of that elephant. At last, Nelson climbed up the shoulders of his mouse friends, one on top of the other, until he was way up on that giant elephant head standing next to that giant elephant ear. "Excuse me," he called out right into that ear. "It seems you've fallen asleep on my friend's tail in the middle of this meadow. I wonder if you could just roll over a few inches in the other direction so he might go free." The giant elephant made a giant low groan. "I'm comfortable, just where I am. Go away." So Nelson asked more of his mouse friends to climb up. One by one, they helped each other up the side of the elephant. One by one, they climbed out into that giant elephant ear on top of that giant elephant head. Again, the giant elephant made a giant low groan. "I'm comfortable just where I am. Go away." Then Nelson had an idea. He whispered to the mice, and then all at once they yelled out together, "Excuse us! It seems you've fallen asleep on our friend's tail in the middle of the meadow. Roll over a few inches in the other direction so he can go free." This time, all those voices together, right next to the elephant's ear, were too loud to ignore. "I was comfortable where I was, but I'll move over if you just agree to stop making such a racket," the elephant cried out. And then the elephant rolled over just a few inches in the other direction. Nelson and the other mice helped each other climb back down, and Desmond was finally free. Desmond and Nelson and all their mouse friends spent the rest of that beautiful day playing in the middle of that beautiful meadow. Quote, "If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse and you say that you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality." End quote. Archbishop Desmond Tutu.
Good morning. How is it with your mind, body, and spirit today? Is there perhaps a boulder of some sort on your tail? Are you even aware of what it is that weighs on you this morning? Or maybe you know what it is, but you just need some help shifting it. The first thing to do, though, is to notice. How is it with you? How's your house holding up? Now it's a good time to reflect on what we are carrying in our hearts. And if moved to do so, share in the chat box so that others may know as well. Because sometimes just the simple act of telling each other our cares, our sorrows, our joys, and our concerns has a profound impact on how we are able to carry them, even as it strengthens our community of caring. And of course, sometimes what we are holding feels just too tender to tell. So whether or not you type into the chat box, and make sure to press return or enter after you do type, please, I invite you to take this time of quiet, musical, and visual interlude to reflect, to connect, to hold, and be held in loving, supportive community. Afterwards, I will read some of what is shared today. lighting this candle in acknowledgement of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is continuing to ravage our entire world and which is disproportionately affecting Indigenous, Black, Hispanic, and Pacific Islander Americans. Also, I have placed this bowl of water here in recognition of the more than 1.5 million acres burned and burning in more than a dozen large wildfires across California. After the service, I'm going to be pouring it onto the earth with prayers of protection and resilience. And I'm sure that there are so many more things that remain unspoken and unshared. Accomplishments, great and small, gratitudes, worries, joy, grief, yes, sorrows, and hopes. Always hope. May you feel yourself heard and held in this caring community.
For today's meditation, we're taking you back to a film clip of Billie Holiday singing one of America's earliest protest songs, Strange Fruit. It is not a meditation intended to bring you peace. Sometimes we need to meditate on troubling realities to gather our will to take action. During a few seconds of the clip, 2 different disturbing photographs will fade in and out. So this meditation is not appropriate for children and highly sensitive adults. Feel free not to watch, just listen to Billie Holiday's iconic voice as she sings Strange Fruit.
When I am frightened, will you reassure me? When I'm uncertain, will you hold my hand? Will you be strong for me? Sing to me quietly. Will you share some of your stories with me? If you will show me compassion, then I may learn to care as you do. Then I may learn to care. When I'm angry, will you still embrace me? When I am thoughtless, will you understand? Will you believe in me, stand by me willingly? Will you share some of your questions with me? If you will show me acceptance, then I may learn to give as you do. Then I may learn to give. When I am troubled, will you listen to me? When I am lonely, will you be my friend? Will you be there for me? Comfort me tenderly. Will you share some of your feelings with me? If you will show me commitment, then I may learn to love as you do. Then I may learn to love.
Reading by Oprah Winfrey in What Happened to You. Your past is not an excuse, but it is an explanation, offering insights into the questions so many of us ask ourselves. Why do I behave the way I behave? Why do I feel the way I do? For me, there is no doubt that our strengths, vulnerabilities, and unique response are an expression of what happened to us. Very often, what happened takes years to reveal itself. It takes courage to confront our actions, to peel back the layers of trauma in our lives, and expose the raw truth of our past. But this is where healing begins.
I was 10 years old, living on Long Island, New York, when the Supreme Court ruled that segregation of schools was unconstitutional. 2 years later, my mom held her breath, waiting for my dad's next naval tour of duty assignment. Would we be ordered back to San Diego submarine base or to the Navy's Fleet Forces Command in Norfolk, Virginia? Her concern was not that we'd have to go to school with Black children, but that my brother and I wouldn't know the social rules of the South and would befriend the chastised Black children, putting ourselves at risk. None of that made sense to me even then. Why should anyone care about the color of the skin of the child in the next desk? In all the years since, I've tried to make sense of the dehumanizing racial hatred and oppression. Why would so many in a nation so proud of our values of life, liberty, and justice for all believe that skin color is a reason to deny those basic rights to the almost 47 million people who are living with an identity as Black? Through these many decades since, I've tried to figure out the underlying why of it without success. Then this April Soul Matter packet introduced me to Isabel Wilkinson's brilliant book, Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents, where she uncovers the unacknowledged and insidious structures that divide us and prevent us from fulfilling the promise of a truly democratic nation. Now, I'm an educated, social justice-minded woman, but I had no idea of the depth and breadth of the foundation of inequality intentionally built into our country, going all the way back to the years after the arrival of the first of Americans to Virginia in 1619, when the colonies sought to refine who could be enslaved for life and who could not. Nor, for that matter, did I understand the incomprehensible reality of the amount and acceptability of the abhorrent violence heaped upon our Black fellow citizens during and after slavery, right up to today, as you know. In our opening words, we shared Wilkinson's analogy that living in America is like living in an old house. She further says, and yes, none of us was here when this house was built. Our immediate ancestors may have had nothing to do with the stress cracks and the bowed walls and the fissures built into the foundation. Yet we are heirs to whatever is right and wrong with it. We did not erect the uneven pillars and joists, but they are ours to deal with now. In interviews, she says she's like the house inspector whose equipment could see the cracks in the structure hidden behind the walls and under the floor. Her job, she says, is to hold our country up to that light so that we can see things we might not otherwise be aware of, built into the very foundation of our democracy that cannot and have not stood the test of time. New wallpaper and paint are not enough to keep our democracy from falling. The stress fractures are visible everywhere, and they are not the fault of people who are crying out for freedom and justice for all. What are those stress cracks? Violent mobs storming our capital, the growing empowerment of violent gangs as central political actors in our country, unrelenting police violence against unarmed Black men, a media that with impunity widely spreads lies that confuse and incite citizens trying to make sense. Hundreds of laws passed in just the last year to suppress the democratic right to vote. Blatant environmental and public health racism, refusal to take action in the face of a climate crisis propelling the destruction of the ecological systems that sustain us all, and a deadly virus that rages beyond our control when compliance with simple social behaviors could have turned it back. How's that for a start? Let me be clear about what I'm saying. Wilkerson traces the origin of our discontents to the core structure on which our democracy was built centuries ago, one that is morally and mortally flawed. That structure created inherent fault lines that over the centuries have come under greater and greater pressure. Our democracy sits on that seismic fault. And all around us, we see signs that the big one is coming. As Wilkerson shines the light on our history to examine the unseen structure, she uses the word caste system to describe what she sees. A caste system that is central to our country's operations, as are the studs and joists we cannot see in the physical building we call home. She tells us our forefathers developed a caste system based upon what people look like, an internalized ranking, unspoken, unnamed, unacknowledged by everyday citizens, even as they, perhaps we, go about their lives, adhering to it and acting upon it subconsciously to this day. Just as those studs and joists and beams that form the infrastructure of a building are not visible to those of us who live in it, so it is with caste. Its very invisibility is what gives it power and longevity, and is an ever-present through line in the country's operation, she says. She did not choose the term caste system lightly. Those words have been used to describe America's social system by a litany of anthropologists. She tells us that they chose the word caste because it best captures the hierarchy, the embedded ranking of human value that was endemic to that world, and that caste also captures the restrictions and boundaries that went beyond how you feel, beyond hate, beyond ill feeling. It was about a structure, about control over an entire group of people that affects everyone, regardless of where we are in the caste system. You see, participation in America's caste system is not optional. We are assigned to the dominant caste or the subordinate caste before we are born. And there are no exit lanes as long as the system exists. I hadn't thought about America having a caste system. I'd thought about class, but of course you can change your class through education and hard work and maybe your clothes. I thought about racism, but those, she says, are the skin, and caste is the bones. Caste, she says, is the powerful infrastructure that holds each group in its place. Wilkerson explains that caste is fixed and rigid, whereas race is fluid and superficial, subject to redefinition to meet the needs of what she calls the dominant caste. That would be white people. Given that the white race will no longer be the majority of the American population in only 2 decades, I suspect that we can watch with anticipation to see how the definition of white may shift to hold its majority. But this is America after all, and class mobility, both up and down, exists. Our demographics shift with that change. Look what's happened in the last 50 years. An ever more extreme concentration of wealth in a sliver of our population. The shrinking of the middle class, loss of jobs to other countries, stagnation of real wages for blue-collar workers, and an increased competition for those jobs between lower middle-class whites and subordinate caste blacks. These changes have surely added pressure to the seismic fault on which our caste system sits. Did you know, for instance, that starting just before the turn of the 21st century, the death rate among middle-aged white Americans aged 45 to 54 began to rise as the least educated in particular succumbed to suicide, drug overdose, and liver disease from alcohol abuse? These deaths of despair, as they are called by economists, totaled some 500,000 white Americans during that period. These were the most precariously situated members of our dominant caste, people who for generations had taken for granted their inherited rank in the caste hierarchy and the benefits they enjoyed from it. Political scientist Diane Muntz coined the term dominant group status threat, which he describes as not the usual form of prejudice or stereotyping that involves looking down on outgroups who are perceived to be inferior. Instead, it is born of a sense that the outgroup is doing too well and thus is a threat to our own dominant group status. As you hear these words, think about how confused we all were when Trump won. Now, think again. Does this begin to help make some sense of it? Wilkerson encourages us to think in this way. If a lower caste person manages to actually rise above an upper caste person, the natural human response from someone weaned on their caste inherent superiority is to perceive a threat to their existence, a heightened sense of unease and displacement, and a fear for actual survival. Who are you if there's no one to be better than? Do the words "make America great again" sound a lot like "make America white again"? Here we can see a distressing, clear parallel with Nazi Germany, who found inspiration in the effectiveness of the American caste system and worked to emulate it. The German old guard that helped Hitler into power underestimated his cunning. The old guard did not foresee or chose not to see that Hitler's actual message was to exploit the methods of democracy to destroy democracy, to exploit the methods of democracy to destroy democracy. By the time they did, it was too late. Fascism had replaced democracy. This is what I see happening in our country, and it stirs fear in the very heart of me and calls out loudly for us to act before it's too late. What made the German people and what makes the American people vulnerable to this kind of manipulation. Why do they behave like that? Wilkerson has a simple answer. She says we must ask instead, what do human beings do under particular circumstances? Once you have researched what human beings do in response to certain circumstances, then the behaviors begin to make a little more sense. So what are the particular circumstances we're talking about here? Well, all those stress cracks I listed a few minutes ago, and add, of course, the growing call for equity and inclusion from white Americans across the country as the horrors of police brutality are uncovered. All of these are really threatening our caste system, causing, we must assume, an unconscious panic of loss of perceived inherent superiority by those closest to the bottom of the dominant caste, and a desperate clinging to the unwarranted power by those who use their wealth to control political power. So I turn to the work on trauma of Dr. Bruce Perry, MD psychiatrist and PhD neuroscientist, that I've followed for years in my work in child welfare. Perhaps his most recent work, What Happened to You? Conversations on Trauma and Resilience and Healing, written with Oprah Winfrey, could shine a light on what we can do to protect our democracy. The title, What Happened to You, is the phrase that the emerging field of traumatology is using in place of the pejorative and judgmental question, what's wrong with you? When working with children and adults with unacceptable behaviors. Coming from a place of what's wrong with you pushes your subject deeper and deeper into defensiveness and self-protective behaviors. When we look, for instance, at the guy in the mega truck sporting those interesting flags with a what's wrong with you attitude, we push him deeper and deeper into the spiral of defensiveness and behaviors that they experience as self-protective and that we see as increasingly dangerous to the well-being of everyone in our country. On the contrary, when we ponder what happened to them that would lead them to this place, doors to understanding open and opportunities for healing those needs begin to be visible. I live on a road where lots of people choose to walk and ride their bikes, especially through this pandemic. I have a lot of rural neighbors who have signs and symbols and other ways of showing exactly how different their politics are than mine on their property. When I encounter my fellow walkers, I don't know what houses they come from. I'm just getting to know these people as people I encounter every day who, like me, are taking advantage of this beautiful place we live. We're developing these sweet, albeit superficial relationships. We're becoming community. We like seeing each other. We like saying hello to their dogs. We like commenting on how glad we are that we're out before the heat of the day. We're just being people together. Many of them really don't look like people I would choose to chat with under other circumstances, but our humanity wins out. What would it be like if we could take that same attitude wherever we go? I'm not covered with tats, and I don't have many friends who are, but I have these sweet relationships with a bunch of people who do. And guess what? They're just people. So if I happen to see them going into a house with assorted symbols that make me nervous, I'm curious about their stories rather than certain that they are to be feared and avoided. And maybe they might be interested in mine. That's what we need to do to cultivate non-strident relationships and repair the divisions that are being exploited by those who would use the methods of democracy to end democracy. Dr. Perry and Oprah frame their work in the fact that individual people, you and me, develop our unique worldview early in life, as early as by 2 months old. And from this worldview, they develop a sense of whether the world is safe or not, and what survival strategies we need to survive. Later in their book, they tell us the same thing happens with systems and organizations. Take law enforcement, for instance, or our criminal justice system. These systems develop a dominant perspective that in the past has not included any significant understanding of developmental stress or trauma, or the interrelated issues that can cause distress and trauma, such as implicit bias, racism, misogyny. But with so much new research emerging about these areas and these issues, it's becoming clear that our systems can't ignore them. Do you think it's possible that some of the people in the white supremacist mobs might have experienced child abuse or other traumatic adverse childhood experiences? Do you think it's possible that some people attracted to law enforcement might have had traumatic adverse childhood experiences? Do you think they might have carried into adulthood the survival strategies they developed to make it through an environment that felt unsafe, especially as the forces pushing our structural seismic faults create fears that they may lose status and privilege they've always taken for granted? Do you think it's possible that some people that rise in positions of power or populate white power organizations might have had a history of traumatic experiences that led them to develop survival strategies that lay blame and condone violence? Marginalized people, excluded, minimized, shamed, are traumatized people because humans are fundamentally relational creatures. To be excluded or dehumanized in an organization, community, or society you're part of results in prolonged, uncontrollable stress. Marginalization is fundamental trauma, and it happens both to those on the lower rungs of our white dominant caste and those on our subordinate caste. So here we have the standoff between the traumatized members of the dominant caste, white caste, with their inherent privilege and power, and the, by definition, traumatized members of the subordinate African-American caste. This is exactly what the defenders of the American caste system want to see. If they can keep the standoff between those vying not to be on the bottom, they have a much better chance of using democracy to topple democracy. Isabel Wilkerson ends her book by reminding us that the American caste system is 400 years old and will not be dismantled by a single law or any one person, no matter how powerful. We have seen it in the years since the civil rights era, that laws like the Voting Acts Right of 1965 can be weakened if there is not a collective will to maintain them. She urges us to understand that the caste system persists in part because we, each and every one of us, allows it to exist in large and small ways, and our everyday actions and how we elevate or demean, embrace or exclude on the basis of the meaning attached to people's physical traits. If enough people buy into the lie of natural hierarchy, then it becomes the truth or is assumed to be. It is one thing to participate in the continued existence of the caste system when we're not aware that it exists. But I hope that those of you listening to me today are now aware and realize that the life we cherish in a democracy is at grave risk. Our country's peril comes not from foreign invasion, but from internal forces seeking to subvert our commitment to democracy and our belief in majority rule, even when people in the white demographic are not the majority. And the majority does not look like it has throughout our history. Will we choose to allow further entrenchments of our inequalities, or will we choose to lead the world as the exceptional nation that we have proclaimed ourselves to be? I see our role in all of this as personal. Begin to build sweet, if even superficial, relationships with people different from ourselves. Make it a habit of asking, what happened to them, rather than what's wrong with them. Shine the house inspector's light on ourselves to bring growing awareness of our own implicit bias and how we benefit or suffer from the implied superiority or inferiority of our assigned race. Fight voter suppression in every way we can, from joining campaigns like UU the Vote and Vote Forward, to being on the front lines, to giving financial support to anti-voter suppression organizations. Thank you for caring. Thank you for stepping out of the comfort the caste system affords those of us with white skin and answering the call to action to do your part to replace our broken structure with one that will allow our values to stand the test of time.
As we look at our house and see the stress cracks, we can find the places that need healing and shine light on our own role in that healing. One important area may be as near as our own personal life or the life of someone we care about. Community Beyond Violence is an organization that is dedicated to eliminating all forms of power-based personal violence, promoting peace, justice, freedom, and dignity for all. As our local nonprofit Pass the Plate partner for August, Community Beyond Violence will receive 25% of your offering, or more if you choose.
Although we're not passing the basket in person, your generosity remains essential to our ability to sustain the work of our community. There are several ways to contribute. You may text an amount to 833-579-0483, give via our website at uugrassvalley.org, via PayPal at paypal.me/UUCM, or mail to UUCM 246 South Church Street, Grass Valley, California, 95945. Thank you.
We dedicate these gifts to practicing compassion, sustainability, and justice, individually and collectively. Thank you for your generosity.
I'm so glad we have this slide every week to be able to show you all the many, many people who are involved in making a service like this happen and to offer them sincere thanks. Allison Rivers Sampson came out of her worship team sabbatical while she's working on her undergraduate degree to help me out as worship associate. Thank you. Beth, once again, our chat host. Bob Miller, once again at the controls. Video editing, Allison stepped in there again, along with Kevin, and of course I did a bit too. Jordan, thank you for all the music. And the readers stepping up, George and Janet Dunstan, Gwen Iman, Tracy Pepper, Allison Rivers Sampson. And the production crew, we usually don't list Carol Folkerson, but by golly, she's so in there. Wonderful work. Beth Caro, Corey Silva, and Reverend Kevin Tarsa. So much going on behind the scenes. Thank you all for making this a powerful and meaningful service.
The promise of the Spirit, faith, hope, and love abide. And so every soul is blessed and made whole. The truth of our hearts is our guide. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together, our hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are answering the call of love. Sometimes we build a barrier to keep love tightly bound, corrupted by fear, unwilling to hear the truth and the beauty we found. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together, our hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are answering the call of love. A bright new day is dawning, when love will not divide. Reflections of grace in every embrace, fulfilling the vision divine. We are answering the call of love. Hands joined together as hearts beat as one. Emboldened by faith, we dare to proclaim we are answering the call of love. We are answering the call of love.
Our closing words today from Archbishop Desmond Tutu inspired today's wisdom story. Desmond gets free. If you are neutral in situations of injustice, you have chosen the side of the oppressor. If an elephant has its foot on the tail of a mouse, and you say you are neutral, the mouse will not appreciate your neutrality. Please join me in carrying these words and these thoughts in your heart as we carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again.
We'll see you next Sunday, August 29th already. My Muzunga eyes are improving with Wendy Wernig and the UU Hysterical Society. Get ready. If you'd like, you can turn on your camera in a second and we'll be unmuting everyone shortly so you can say hello. You'll be invited to choose a breakout room for conversation. You can stay in the large group or come back to it at any time. And here's a list of today's breakout rooms.